Salutations, everyone, and welcome back to another Total Warhammer 3 guide. I'm Lord Forent, and here we are with a very requested guide, this one for the Dark Elves. So, the Dark Elves are dark. If you had to rate them as good or evil or chaos or order, they are probably definitely on the evil side. They're fun, and we'll cover a lot of different mechanics and how to play them. This video will be divided into faction concepts, how they play. Further on, we'll go over units, then economy, technology, followed by the various lords, starting locations, starting moves, and any unique mechanics associated with those lords. And those should all be chaptered below, so you can jump to whatever section you want to see. And I hope you enjoy it. If you enjoy the guide, please do like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, all those great things. Feel free to ask questions about what I say. I might say something wrong. And then also be aware this is a beta right now, so things may change, but by and large, the underlying principles should remain the same. So let's get right into it. So the Dark Elves have several different unique mechanics around them, and we'll cover them all. Let's start with the easiest one, which is loyalty. Every lord, when recruited, starts with a range of loyalty. If the loyalty of a lord over time reaches 0, they'll revolt, form a new faction, taking their army and potentially causing problems for you. This can be annoying when it happens. Now, the ways you get around loyalty are winning battles with them or recruiting units and leaving them in a large army. So long as you don't have 1 or 2 lords scattered around the map doing nothing, you shouldn't see too many problems with this. Just be aware that if for some reason you suffer multiple defeats with a lord, your loyalty could fall. The odds of you suffering multi-defeats and your lord surviving them are slim. But just be aware that this is a thing. It's involving the Skaven, the Vampire Coast, and obviously the Dark Elves. I hope they change it. It's kind of not a huge problem right now. But when you recruit it, be aware that there are different amounts. Try not to hire 1 loyalty lords. Try and hire ones that have like 5 or up. Some various different factions. Example, Malekith here is the Witch King of Nagaroth. Gives +2 loyalty to all his new recruits. Just be aware that that is a thing. Okay, the next mechanic, and this is a semi-easy one to talk about, is slaves. So this has been totally reworked from Total Warhammer 2, except on how you get it, basically. So slaves function kind of like slaves would. They're forced labor. When you have them, they'll provide additional income. High slaves, you get construction bonuses. Large amounts of slaves will affect your control, and you can perform rites and diktats using them. Now, what is a diktat, you might ask? That is the new biggest change. That is over here under slave diktats on the bottom left. You can either get control for 20 turns. You can get 1,000 gold and 2 control for 5 turns. Both of these are 5 turns. And then this last one is growth of 50 and negative 10% construction costs for 5 turns as well, all for the cost of 200 slaves. Now, this is just a general thing, but basically all the Dark Elves start with slaves at the beginning, and I recommend you pop Slave Drive immediately so that your growth goes up by 50 for 5 turns. It's usually enough to level up your capital or other settlements once or twice. Considering some like Malekith here start with the ability to get to 2, this allows you to get to 3 even faster. Since the Dark Elves are a mid to late game superpower, the sooner you can get to the later buildings, the better. Now, you can also get slaves through a variety of mechanics, and I'll show a couple of them here. So the first one is raiding. If we are right here, we're in hostile territory, although I don't know if it actually knows that. No, it doesn't. If it was a hostile territory, we could be doing raiding and stuff, but we in fact don't know that the Skaven live in this territory. Actually, we can find that out. There we go. Oops. Let's see. I think I can show this to you. Scout ruins, please. Why are you not scouting ruins? Okay. She, for some reason, is not being able to scout these ruins. Okay, never mind that. If you fight a battle and win, the Dark Elves have the standard murder captives, ransom captives, or in between, enslave and get replenishment. 99% of the time as the Dark Elves, you're going to want to take the slaves because various buildings you have use slaves per turn, so maintaining a large amount of slaves is very important. Now, another thing to note about slaves is you have a fixed cap that you didn't have in Total Warhammer 2. Um, so you can only store so much at a time. Wow, I guess this hero is just glitched. Nope, you can't actually get it from raiding anymore. My bad. Because you haven't done a lot of raiding with this faction. When you occupy a settlement, if you loot or sack it, you will also get slaves as well. If you do that, good for you. You've got more slaves. A lot of the times, if you can't hold the settlement, sacking's good. If you are going to take it, I rarely loot and occupy unless it's like a high-level capital settlement. By and large, I find just occupying better. You get a decent amount from fighting battles of slaves anyway, and almost all the Dark Elf Lords have this Dread Slaver ability here, which increases casualties captured post-battle. In fact, some, like, I don't know if Malekith has it here, but some of the Dark Elf Lords have a chance to get more slaves after battle. Suffice to say, it's about 1 to maybe 2 battles to get a 200 to use for a dictat. Now you notice the capacity went up. That's because we own another province. It builds up over that way. It's faction slave capacity. It does go up over time as you upgrade the settlements, but you're better off occupying more or building buildings to increase that. And we'll talk about the buildings under economy. Now, the other thing slaves are used for are rights. And this is more than the dictats. Early on, you're not going to use it that much, but one over here, specifically the sacrifice to Mathlan, is going to be rather important. You have to first unlock it by building a slave pen building, which is right here, which also gives you slaves per turn and a huge capacity. But once you unlock that, you'll be able to summon a black arc. So black arcs, and we can go over Black's art a bit more when we go to one of the Dark Elf Lord Starts, specifically the Corsair Loki Fellheart. But suffice to say, it is an amazing mechanic. Basically, it's a ocean-only unit or army where it can recruit units to it. It works like a horde. So if you've played the Beastmen or Nakai the Wanderer, you would know how to use a horde. It's similar to that. It's important to note, if it is destroyed, you can get it back. It's like an immortal legendary unit, lord. And from it, you can recruit various things in an area of influence. That is very important because Dark Elves do not have access to a global recruitment. Instead, you have recruitment from black arcs in an area. It'll have a radius around it. You can move it around the map. As long as you're in the radius, you'll get increased loot, increased slaves. You'll be able to recruit from it. I think it can even get replenishment. It can do army abilities. It's a very powerful thing. If you play Lokhir Fellheart, you'll definitely use it. So we'll talk more about it then. Just know it exists. And it's an important right to use. It's going to take you a while to get it going, but once you get it going, you can literally kill most everything outside of the vampire coast at sea. You're very strong. You can hold oceans, you can raid, you can pillage, you can loot coastal settlements. It's very strong. You can also occupy coastal settlements, but anyway, it's very strong. Other stuff, sacrifice to Hecate right here. Give sorcerers experience and more winds of magic. If you're using magic, use this. Sacrifice of Cain. Casualty replenishment plus 20 is worth mentioning. If you're going to fight a lot of battles in a row, pop this, get the income, get the increased slaves. If you fight a battle with this going, it won't pay for itself completely in terms of slaves, but 2 battles usually will. And also give this Dark Conduit ability, which when you do the explosion, hurts the vigor of people, increases cooldown, and does damage. Doesn't affect friendly troops, and is a decent range considering the range is infinite and the duration lasts 27 seconds. It's very powerful and it's worth using. The next one, sacrifice to Etharti, I'm going to guess. Obviously, my pronunciation's probably wrong. This gives loyalty to your lord, so if you're struggling managing loyalty, which you really shouldn't struggle with immensely, pop this and you'll gain control. Another thing I should mention, although I can't show it to you right now because I'd have to load a save file for it, is their hero unit here, the Cainite Assassin, which you get from the Shrine of Cain building. Once it gets to, I think it's level 4, they get in a special skill they can unlock, which has a chance of increasing loyalty per lord they're accompanying. If you never want to deal with loyalty problems in the game, get a Cainite Assassin, stick it in a lord with that ability, and that lord will never revolt, in my experience. And that right there, between all three of those, is the vast, unique mechanics to the generic High Elves. Now, other ones will have special, and we'll talk about that in those areas. But for now, that is it. Okay, next thing to talk about is units. So the High Elves have quite the lineup of units. You'll notice they have a massive amount. Don't look at this. This doesn't matter at this point. They have access to a vast amount of heroes, a vast amount of infantry, lords, cav, and beasts. So we're going to use, obviously, the building browser so you can see where they are. The first one, your base settlements are going to give you access to dread spears. This is similar to the High Elves spearmen, but it is a better unit in my opinion. It's better at fighting. It's got really good missile defense and really good melee defense. It's not going to kill anything, but it tends to hold a line pretty well, which is good because the Dark Elves kind of struggle to hold front lines in my experience. This will be one of your key units for most of the game. Considering you're going to be using monsters, artillery, and range units and cav to back you up, this is a fine infantry unit to use for beginning and mid of the game. Now, it's important to note, all Dark Elves come with this ability called Murderous Prowess. Basically, as your army kills things, Murderous Prowess builds up. Once it triggers, you get a huge melee attack, charge, missile damage, leadership, and vigor per second for 90 seconds. Whoops, that's not my phone. Now that that's all done, sorry, somebody left their phone in my couch. So I had to go deal with that. Anyway, I'm back. So, base one, Dread Spears. Next one is your base barracks unit. You get access to the Bleak Swords. This is pretty much the standard basic infantry unit most factions get. It's the same thing as your Dread Spears, but with less melee defense, better melee attack, and a sword rather than spears. Honestly, unless you're going to fight factions that are pure melee early on, almost all the time Dread Spears are the better unit. Honestly, the only reason I build a Bleak Sword is if I know I'm going to be fighting other Dark Elves or Skaven at the beginning, where the additional melee strength, the fact they will actually be able to beat both Skaven and Dread Spears in melee combat is really the only reason I take these guys. The next one, and this is the start of the Dark Elves archery. The Dark Elves overall have very good archery units. In fact, this is a level 1 barracks, but it gives you a level tier 2 archery unit. Dark Shards, they have a medium range. They're not super long like some of the Wood Elves and High Elves, but they do decent damage. The big thing to note about these guys, and one reason that you will use them pretty much in your armies the whole game, or a variation of them, is that their missiles are armor piercing. Most people, they have to get super high level archery units just to get armor piercing. Your base archery units are armor piercing. This means fighting any faction with armor, you can actually wreck them with range. So dwarves, warriors of chaos, other dark elves, you do a very good job of killing them at range. Now, this doesn't help you if they have shields, but if they don't, you'll tear them to shreds. Just be aware that if they don't have armor, you're going to be less effective than normal ranged archers. The next one, level 2. This gives you access to the Master unit. This is a rather strange unit, in my opinion. It is your standard sort of melee hero, but it has upgrades that kind of provide buffs in an area. It also has Guardian. So if you stick it near one of your lords or heroes, they'll gain additional physical resistance. which is very useful. I recommend trying to have one of these, have them accompany your lord into combat, and they'll kind of pay for themselves. They're decent melee combat, much more defensive than offensive, which is fine. The Dark Elves are not a infantry melee faction, in all honesty. The next one is an upgraded version of the Dark Shards. The big difference here, these guys don't have shields. These ones do. They also cost more. Once you get Dark Shards with shields, you never should train Dark Shards without shields, unless you don't have this barracks building. It's always a good upgrade. These are, in my opinion, some of the strongest archers in the game, outside of like elites like Sisters of Avalorn and stuff. They are shielded archers, meaning in a duel between two different types of archers, these guys almost inevitably win that battle. Unless the enemy outranges them or has some type of missile that penetrates shields, you're going to win that battle because they will block the arrows coming in, but their arrows going out will hit. Plus, they are still armor piercing, which is amazing. And their block is actually really good. 55% is pretty high. Honestly, these are going to be the meat and potatoes of your army early on till you get some more of the elite stuff. Following up, this is a kind of interesting barracks here because it gives access to an artillery unit. Now, most people have to build a separate building tree, military building tree, just to get artillery. You don't. You get in your base barracks. Now, to be fair, it's not the world's greatest artillery unit, but it provides its job. It's going to get 100 plus kills almost any battle unless it gets flanked. It's not going to last at all in melee combat, but it is a siege attacking ability, and it has a varying shot. It can fire single missile units, missiles, basically. One ballista bolt, good at killing lords or monstrous units or heroes, or like heavily elite units. Like top of the line infantry units or semi-monstrous units like minotaurs for the beastmen. Or it could shoot multi-shots, which are much better against normal infantry. Fires a volley of them so it hits multiple places rather than just one. If you aim this yourself, which you can do in battles, you can inflict some serious casualties. Otherwise, it does a decent amount. Just be aware the AI currently is pretty good at dodging artillery shots from a distance. So it honestly, to the best effect is to hit them while they're either locked in firing, casting, or in melee combat from a distance. Got a decent range. I recommend bringing one of these in every army, if not two, all the way to the end of the game. The next one you have access to are the Black Ark Corsairs. So these are two different units that you will normally see in the Black Ark, which you summon through that ritual. This one is a very short-ranged handbow unit. It is not armor penetrating, but it does fire while moving, meaning it can skirmish really well against enemies that can't catch it. And if they do catch it, is half decent in melee combat as well. Further on, we have access to the Black Ark Corsairs. So if you want a melee infantry unit that's not top tier, like some of your elite ones, but can still fight things in melee combat, but is not amazing, this is your unit. They are better than what your bleak swords are, for sure. They will wreck bleak swords. The downside is they die a lot. I have never found these to be amazing, but if you are doing a lot of melee fighting, like versus the Skaven or something, these guys prove their worth then. They die pretty quickly to range, though. And then we have access to the Sisters of Slaughter. So this gets into the whole Dark Elves weird cult-like behavior set up by Morathi, one of the lords. They're kind of crazy. These are a whip infantry unit, which makes them relatively unique in the game. There's only a handful of whip units around. They are... I can't say they're my favorite unit. They're not horrendously awful, but they're not amazing. They've got good melee defense. They have physical resistance. They have this Trial of Blade thing, which if they're fighting in melee or they're losing, they get a bonus towards their attack and armor piercing, meaning they do well against enemies, but they're not really going to win battles for you, if that makes sense. The melee defense means they're hard to kill, but honestly, I don't love their attack animation. you've got better infantry units out there that are more expensive, but also are stronger. And you've also got lesser infantry units that are cheaper, but still do almost as good of a job. Now, these things will kill stuff that your bleak dread spears won't. But the dread spears I like better overall. It's kind of a shame. I think this unit should be stronger than it is. It's still not bad. Bring it, try it out, see if you enjoy it all. Moving on, we have access to the calves, the plateau of dark steeds. So these are kind of interesting. The Dark Elves really don't use bows, they use crossbows. So this is a following on that. These is a skirmishing, medium range, armor piercing cav unit. This might be one of my few favorite ranged cav units in the game. It will die to other archers though, so be aware of it. But against anything that can't catch it, it will destroy. If the enemy army is slow and heavily armored, like the dwarves or warriors of chaos per se, these things are your anti those two faction unit. You will pepper them from range, they will skirmish, they will run away and shoot. Now be aware they do not have fire while moving, which is a shame. If they did, they'd probably be one of the strongest units in the game. Meaning that if they're fighting cav, they have to stop and shoot, meaning cav can catch them. Once they get caught in melee, they die. Now you have also access to the Dark Riders, which is a melee version of this unit. Honestly, I like the Dark Riders with a crossbow way more than I do without it. This unit is bad. I'm just going to be honest. It's a tier 1 cav unit. It's not going to be able to kill almost anything in melee except for archers or artillery. You're fighting an enemy with archers and artillery, bring one. Otherwise, skip this unit. That's basically all I can tell you about it. It's just bad. Further on, though, you get access to the Messenger's Lodge House, where you get Dark Riders with shields. Now, as much as I trashed this unit, this one is not much better. Yes, they have shields, so they won't die to archers, and yes, they have slightly more melee defense, but overall, they're still kind of bad. I'd ignore this one as well, considering this is a level 3 settlement building and it gives you a tier 1 cav unit, should tell you something. On the other hand, you have access to Doomfire Warlocks. Now, this makes up for your pretty pathetic cav units. This is a strong, hard-hitting magical cavalry unit, which is quite strange. They do poison and they do magical attacks. They've got decent combat stats. They have physical resistance of 40, meaning this melee defense staff that looks bad is actually a lot better. They will last quite a long time in melee combat, and they will do a good job if the enemy's armored. If not, they'll weaken them till they can kill them. But the big reason you bring this is they have spells attached to them. Soul Blight ruins armor and weapon damage of the enemy. Cast this on a cav unit before they charge in, and it stacks with the poison to the point that the enemy is dealing like 40% less damage and has no armor. It is amazingly powerful. Cast it twice. And you have access to the Lesser Doom Bolt, which is a bombardment spell that does really decent damage, armor, and magic. Penetrating. All great spells. It basically doubles as a mini spellcaster. You throw this into combat. While they're in combat, you hit them with spells. They can wreck entire enemy units on their own. It's not to be underestimated. Bringing 2 of these to any battle usually is all you need for cav, and they will, by and large, pay for themselves. Just be aware archers are, again, their worst enemy, and throwing them into spearmen with their low armor isn't the best idea either, but they can just bombard the spearmen from a distance. Further on, we have access to the Shades. So the Shades are a weird unit, in my opinion. They have longer range than your Dark Shards, and they're better at doing range damage, which you'd think would make them better. The downside, and this is a pretty major downside in my mind, they don't have shields. Meaning, if they get into a duel with other archers, their lower range hurts them, and they tend to get destroyed by other archers. Now, if the enemy doesn't have archers, sure, this is a great unit. You'll want to bring it. If they do have archers, I would still urge Dark Shards with shields. It's up to you, though. These guys will go even with any other archer unit, but they won't dominate, and they are significantly more expensive to maintain than your Dark Shards with shields. but they're good at melee combat and they stalk, meaning you can set up some really nice ambushes in battles. Further on, we have access to melee shades. So these still have range. It's still just like these ones, so it's pretty much an upgrade. These guys have dual weapons, so they do pretty good melee damage. Other here, we have the shards with great swords. So this is armor penetrating melee. This is not armor penetrating melee. That is the biggest difference of these two. Overall, yeah, I like the shades with great swords if I'm going to use them, because armor penetrating comes into play around level 3 anyway. Overall, 2 solid units. If you want range, I still like Dark Shards better than either of these shades, but they are very powerful nonetheless. Moving on, now we start to get into the slightly more elite infantry with Witch Elves. So if you remember Sisters of Slaughter, this is another similar unit to that. Obviously, it has dual daggers, hits with less damage, much lower melee defense, does weaken enemies and melee defense when attacked, and makes the enemies they're fighting go crazy. Lesser physical resistance. They do have Frenzy, though. These are a damage dealer. If you flank with them, they're really good. Just be aware they don't have crazy charge bonus. They don't need to. Overall, they're a worse version of Sisters of Slaughter, but you get them earlier. They have their place in your army. Just don't expect them to hold a front line. They're kind of a glass cannon. They do a lot of damage, but if they aren't actively winning the battle, they die. Sisters of Slaughter are a bit more hold the line unit. Further on, moving up here, we get the Canine Assassin, which I mentioned earlier. Level 4, I believe it is. You get an ability that has a high chance of increasing loyalty if it's accompanying a lord. Stick it in there. The lord won't revolt. More importantly for this one, this is a very good sniping unit. Has high missile damage, low range, but it's also really good in melee combat. Overall, this is a solid unit. Its only weakness is it doesn't have a shield or high armor. You get access to these varieties of skills that you can get later on. Out of them, I recommend this one, Dark Venom. It will boost your weapon damage by 90%, which is huge. That almost gets you up to 700 in terms of damage. Very good at dueling other lords. Can deal some significant damage. Decent resistance against range. Is immune to psychology. It fires while moving, meaning you can put it on skirmish and it can just run away. I don't recommend leaving skirmish on this unit, though. Unless you're running away from a slow lord, it has problems with shooting, in my opinion. Plus, it's actually good in melee, unlike a lot of ranged lords. You will defeat a lot of stuff in melee. It's not particularly good against mass infantry, though, but against other lords or like monster single entity or low entity units, it does a really good job. Next one, we get the Death's Hag. So, as much as the Canine Assassin is good against lords, heroes, and monsters, the Death Hag is good against infantry and mass units. Very high melee attack, good physical resistance, has bonuses to attack, goes on Rampage, Foe Seeker, all the standard melee infantry stuff. Worth bringing, very strong, throw it into the enemy massed infantry, and by and large, it'll kill them. Just be aware of other lords or heroes that could kill it. In which case, that's what your Canine Assassin is there for. Kill those guys first. Further on, top of Temple of Cain, which of course is your anti-corruption building. You get huge boost of recruitment rank, which makes these units even stronger, but you get access to the Harganath Executioners. So if you were wondering where your high-level Greatswords infantry unit is, outside of the Shades, here it is. Harganath Executioners are strong. I'm still not the biggest super fan of them, but they wreck other armored units in melee combat. They have good armor, so they can even fight non-heavily armored units powerfully. Overall, you won't be disappointed with these unless they're fighting something like Cav or somebody that has high armor penetration. Throw them in the front line. By and large, they'll kill things. Just be aware they don't have anything to counter cavalry. In fact, the only thing that counters Cav in your entire army is Dread Spears, really, or other Cav. Now, Doomfire Warlocks do a good job, but Dread Spears are your best bet against Cav factions. Thankfully, the only one you really have to be terrified at the moment is Bretonia, because Cav Total Warhammer 3 isn't that strong. I'm assuming that's going to get patched, at which point things will change. Just be aware, this is probably the best infantry unit you get on the battlefield for quite some time. With one other exception, this still has its place, though. Further on, we start to get into the monsters. We get access to Harpies, which are your pretty standard flying Harpy unit. Not very strong, but has its place flying over enemy armies, taking out archers, assuming they don't die to the archers, or artillery, which is where they excel. They'll lose against any other flying unit, basically, though, except for bats. So just be aware of that. The next one, you get into some of the chariots. So as much as the Dark Elves' Cav isn't amazing, their chariots are pretty decent. The Scourge Runner Chariot is a reasonably long-ranged unit with a good missile strength. It kind of functions almost like a mobile artillery unit, although with less range. Overall, pretty strong, can move around, can fire while moving, which is great. You can flank the enemy, run around them, just keep running circles around everything but Cav. I would advise not throwing into melee combat early on, though, unless you have to. Its combat stats aren't great, but it is a chariot, so when it charges in, it will knock back enemies as well. Overall, great unit. Bring one or two if you want to. Of course, then you have to be good at using chariots and keeping multiple aspects of the battlefield going at once. If you can manage it, great unit. Further on, we get access to the Feral Manticore, which honestly, my opinion, once you get it, Harpies are totally obsolete. It's a single entity unit, but it's much better than the Harpies. It will kill things. It will destroy artillery. It even can destroy archers if left alone, because it is reasonably resistant to missiles. Just be aware it can go on a rampage and you lose control. So dropping into the middle of the enemy army might not be the best idea, because getting it out will be difficult, to put it mildly. The next ones we get access to are the Charybdis unit. So this is a version, it's similar to the Hydra over here, but it has this Abyssal Howl where it damages enemy leadership in an area. Overall, it's very good in combat. It moves well in shallow water if you've got shallow water to move in, which most maps don't have. It's going to hold its own in melee combat. Overall, though, if you want a better melee fighter, I would go with the War Hydra. I like the Hydra better. So the War Hydra is the next one. This is probably one of your most elite monstrous units in the whole game. I have never felt bad having 2 or 3 of these in my armies, except for the enemies who they wreck. So they have a fire breath similar to a dragon unit. More importantly, though, they have regeneration. They have another takes its place, which they can use to heal them outside of the passive regeneration. You can proc this, heals a massive amount of their health, 12%, use it 4 times. You've almost got 50% more health than you have initially. Combined with this, your Hydras are extraordinarily difficult to kill. They're resistant to missiles, which is really all you need. Their weakness is honestly heroes or lords or magic spells, which if you play properly shouldn't be a problem, but against base infantry, there's almost no infantry line that can hold up to a War Hydra with ease, except for like a highly elite spear unit. Lothran Spear Guards actually do well against this, which is the High Elf unit. But against everything else, you're never going to go wrong throwing this into the enemy line, really. It's even got good leadership, too. It's a great unit. Further on, you have your dragon. So, Dark Elves have a Dark Dragon, the Black Flying Dragon. Has similar noxious breath to the Hydra. Obviously, since it's in the air, it has a better accuracy. You can lose 3 times. Just be aware you can't use it once you get in melee, so try to cast it before your dragon gets into the fight, rather than trying to cast it once they are in the fight, which I see a lot of people trying to do. Anyway, it's overall a great unit. The only downside I see is it does not have regeneration like the Hydra. So they bring 2 different things. The Hydra and Charybdis obviously are land-based. Out of the 2, I prefer the Hydra. In terms of flying, versatility, driving off artillery, archers, taking out other flying units, Black Dragon fills that role really well. Not to mean that the High Elves with their powerful range can't handle other flying units, though. And then finally going on, we start to get to the final top tier stuff. This is unusual because it's a level 4 settlement to build this. This is the Dread Manse. This is your aristocracy building. Dark Elves are all about nobility, surprisingly. So this gives you access to the Black Guard of Nagaron, which, as I said, there's not a lot of anti-cav units. This is the upgrade, arguably, to the level 1 Dread Spears. The downside is you have no shields, but you have better armor. This thing is a monster anti-cav, anti-monstrous unit. I have never felt bad about using this in combat. Blackguard of Nagaron holds the flanks. You get Harganath Executioners in the middle, and if need be, you flank with Witch Elves and their cav warlocks, while everything gets shot from a distance by Dark Shards or Shades. You can wreck a lot of stuff. This fills a very needed position in the Dark Elves line. You bring this, now you can fight factions like Bretonnia, who have strong cav with ease. Overall, this will go even with almost everything except for armor-piercing archers, which oddly enough means its biggest weakness is probably other Dark Elf factions. Next one, we get Cold One Knight. So as much as I like to rage about how bad the Dark Riders are and how much superior the Doomfire Warlocks are, this is still not the world's best cav unit, but it is significantly better than Dark Riders in my opinion. Better stats, better combat ability. Overall, throw it into the enemy, you'll do pretty well. Once you get low hit points, it does get physical resistance and more damage, which is really unusual. I can't think of many factions or units that get this ability. Basically, as it gets into more trouble, it gets stronger. And next to that, you also have access to the Cold One Chariots. So this is similar to the upgrade to the Scourge Runner Chariots. Overall, it's a better unit with less range. That's pretty much what it is. Its missile does more damage. The lower range is a bit of an issue. Speed-wise, it's slower, but it proves its role overall. It's heavily armored. It is anti-armor unit in melee combat, meaning you can actually throw it into melee combat. I still would be very careful about throwing it in there. It is labeled a missile chariot for a reason. You basically want to strafe the enemy, keep riding it by their sides and blasting away. It's got good ammunition though, so it probably will fulfill its role and get quite a few kills. Overall, once you get it, upgrade from the Scourge Runner Chariots. Never build these again. And finally, at the top, you get access to the Cold One Dread Knights. Now this, finally, is a standard cav unit. This will hold its own against most other cav. It will not handle other elite cav units, in my opinion, but it is good against mid-tier and even low top-tier cav units. Once you get this, this should be the only type of cav you build. Be aware, though, it does take a level 5 settlement. And then finally, we'll get into the last two ones here. You have the Sorceress's Abode, which gives you access to your various sorcerers, out of which, in my opinion, I like Death. I don't like Fire. I don't really like Beast that much. Shadow has its place. Even Dark has its abilities, but by and large, if you go with Death and you go with you go with Shadows, you'll almost never go wrong in terms of spellcasters. Overall, pretty normal spellcaster unit. Nothing really worth writing home about in terms of strengthnesses or weakness, although you do have access to quite a few of them. But the most important thing from this line is access to the Bloodrack Shrine. So the Bloodrack Shrine is a super powerful one entity magic chariot. Hits from a good range, does good damage, is actually decent in melee combat, has good ammunition, and causes terror, but causes the Aura of Agony. When it's in melee combat, the enemies around you get debuffed. So its poor combat stats are not representative of its actual fighting ability. Same thing with the Aura of Ardor. When it's in melee combat, all your allies around it get a bonus. So basically, you want this fighting in melee combat if you're fighting in melee combat with other units around it. Otherwise, sit it back, watch its missiles do lots of damage. And that right there is a very solid unit. I bring it to almost every fight, and overall it rounds out very nicely the Dark Elves roster. The Dark Elves' really weakness, I would say, is they don't have strong mid-game infantry units to hold the line. It's going to take you a while to get to Nagaron guards and hard Gnath executioners. Once you do, though, you've got probably one of the strongest melee lineups in the game. Obviously, not as strong as pure melee lineups, but they do their job. And the Dark Elves have good armor piercing range to go along with it, meaning so long as your front lines hold and your archers are shooting, you will wreck most enemy forces on the field. I think, in my opinion, the Dark Elves probably have one of the most rounded military trees of any faction. You can pretty much customize to fighting anybody, and they'll do a decent job. So have fun with them, enjoy, wreck some enemies. Okay, moving on now from units into technology. So the Dark Elves have a similarly tiered technology tree to the High Elves, which makes sense. However, the Dark Elves are not limited by the need to build buildings. Overall, this is a very nice tech tree. You can speed through it rather quickly. So first off, you have access to 3 different trees. You have to research the first category of each tree to unlock the next upgrade, and then on and so forth. As long as you research the first tree, you can then tech up as well, which allows you to get to this upgrade level 3 rather quickly. Obviously, you don't need to get here super fast because a lot of these technologies only apply to your elite infantry, but it's nice to know that you can kind of move through the tree rather fast. So of your first tree, by and large, and we'll touch upon some notable ones, your bottom tree is going to be administrative technologies. Your middle one tends to be beasts and pirate stuff, and your top one is your base infantry as well. So the first stuff to note is Driven by Vengeance is a great tech. It's worth getting. It's probably either the first tech you want to start researching or the second. This makes your Dread Spears and Bleak Swords and Black Arc Corsairs actually be able to kill things in melee combat. Since you're going to be using them for quite a while, better to get them stronger now rather than later. Further on, Speed. I kind of ignore this one. Martial Society is worth snagging though. Makes all your base infantry that much stronger, recruited at a higher rank. But below it is a big one. Ascension through Battle. 5 leadership is, I won't say it's game changing, but it makes your units fight a lot better. Since the Dark Elves units do have leadership and can run away, keeping your already decently strong units in combat longer makes a big difference. Now, the middle one here, Battle Loot and Raiding is always nice. Strengthens your Black Arc stuff and sacking. Naval Training strengthens your sailors, and if you fight at sea, makes your army stronger. This is how, with a Black Arc army fighting at sea, by and large, your Black Arc army can take out most of their factions at sea. Bloodthirsty companions honestly ignore it unless you're crazy enough to use harpies. Further down, though, Founded on Tyranny is a really nice growth. If you're not fighting immediately and you need the extra bonuses towards combat, take Founded on Tyranny. The growth is huge over time. Further on, if you do Founded on Tyranny and you still have time, Revel in Suffering will give you a nice 25 growth in all your provinces, meaning you will get to those high-level and very needed high-level buildings faster as the Dark Elves. Continuous Slave Supply, combined with your other bonuses, increases your slave haul, which is always a good thing. Exploit Feuds, it's worth snagging. The Dark Elves have some public order problems, so a +1 control is solid. On the next tree, similar stuff. By the way, each of these upgrades here increases your Black Arc growth, which is your naval lord thing. It's just a good thing to know that that's how you grow your Black Arcs faster. Top one, and this is worth getting early on. I might even beeline to this if I'm not going to go down this, because these are the actual combat bonuses. Outside of leadership, this doesn't make your units super, super strong in combat. This does. So it costs 200 gold. Just be aware of that cost, because it can be substantial early on. This is a weapon strength and missile strength buff, making your already strong range units even better. And then you get reworked crossbows. This gives additional range and ammo to your archers, which makes them that much better. I like dark shards, and shades are really solid too. This makes them that much better. Hit and Run strengthens your cav. Honestly, somewhat neglectable considering how weak your early cav is. Once you start using Doomfire Warlocks, though, or you're using Shades, it's worth getting. Bolt cartridges makes your one artillery unit better. If you're going to use artillery, bring this. If not, ignore. Broken by the Lash here. This basically boosts your monstrous units. It is worth noting that this recruit rank for Harpies does apply to War Hydras and Charybdis, and War Hydras are amazing. Daylight Denied, income from slaves, income from mining resources. It's good if you got gold or iron or stone, basically. Sadistic Handlers, increasing the speed of these units. In my opinion, it's nice, but it's not a highly needed tech. Further on, Tempered in Blood, income from slaves. The big thing you would want here early on is Festivals of Cain. This helps control corruption and gives your Witch Elves and Sisters of Slaughter a ward save. This means those two type of melee units that are not particularly great in melee combat now suddenly become a lot better. 5% ward save is really good. Purge the Weak, income from settlements. If you're struggling with money, take it. Otherwise, if you're managing slaves properly, you shouldn't have too much problem. Temple Training Ground buffs these units even better. All told, if you snag all three of these, you'll be making more money and you can actually afford to upkeep your not so great mid-tier units. Tier 3, though, you start to get into some more impressive stuff. Instruments of War makes your Harganath and Blackguard of Nagaron that much stronger. Black Iron Armor gives armor to your basic infantry units. This helps your Dark Shards become that much better at range and not dying if they get in melee combat instantly. Does not solve the Dread Spears or Bleak Sword units' actual combat stat problem. Exotic Beasthide gives armor to some of your Cav and your Black Ark Corsairs. I prefer this one over Black Iron Armor. This makes these units actually that much better at actually fighting. Walking in Darkness, additional campaign movement speed. This should be one of your priorities once you get to this tech level. 10% movement range, always a good thing. Middle, increased recruitment. Cheaper maintenance, basically for a variety of units. Pick which one you're using, take the tech. Consumed by Rivalry, more control, more loyalty for your lords, not that you should be having too much trouble. This strengthens relations with Dark and High Elves, which is kind of odd that you can get along with High Elves, but whatever, won't solve your problem. This one strengthens your lords and your assassination temp. If you are using Doomfire Warlocks, you want this tech. Additional 5 melee attack on that cav unit is almost a 1/6 increase in power. Hardship and Cruelty, better recruitment, makes your lords better at defending, and makes Doomfire Warlocks that much tankier. Tier 3, and this is where things start to get really kind of crazy. Huge leadership buff for all your elite infantry, just makes them fight better. Bloodforged Plate Mail makes all your high-level infantry and cav have better armor. Stacking this with exotic Beasthide armor and other stuff. Some of these bonuses, if you stack them all together, you can end up with probably the second or third hardest armed army in the game. Ceremonial Weapons, buff to your elite infantry's attack and weapon strength. Actually combining this with some of the other bonuses, your Witch Elves and Sisters of Slaughter actually become decent melee units. Serrated Blades, increased defense for Blackguard, always good. Blackguard of Nagaron is amazing. This makes them stronger. Under the Yoke, this is all about your dragons, War Hydras, and Charybdis, and recruit rank for your elite cav and chariots. Definitely get Harness Fury if you're using War Hydras. You'll thank me. That 10 bonus for attack and defense is really nice. Life of Dread, ambush chance. Honestly, you're probably not going to need to do too many ambushes, but it's a nice bonus. Dead Accountability makes your lords better. Blood and Death, more corruption reduction if you're struggling with it, and a bit of an income bonus. And Study the Chaos Waste, make your already powerful Doomfire Warlock cav unit, assuming you've snagged the other tech, now gives them a 10% war slave and a higher recruitment rank. They all of a sudden become top tier cav units. And that is the Dark Elves technology tree. On to the Lords. Okay, we'll start with the first one. So this is Malekith, the king of the Dark Elves. Formerly a high elf, but now has gone completely off the rails, encased in a set of sorceress armor, who pretty much just wants to wipe out and take over and rule the remains of the high elves, as well as the Dark Elves. He is based out of Nagaron. He's kind of the default Dark Elf faction, kind of like Tyrion is for the High Elves. So his bonuses are he gets better allegiance with the other Dark Elves, which allows you to use more allegiant recruitment from them, which is nice. You get better relations with the Dark Elves, meaning the odds of you fighting Dark Elf factions will only happen if you want to start the war. Cheaper upkeep for your Blackguard of Nagaron, seeing he's the Witch King of Nagaron, makes sense. Basically, it allows you to upkeep a massive, powerful infantry army, and otherwise he decreases your base infantry units, which is just a nice early game buff. The big thing there is the upkeep for the Blackguard of Nagaron. You should bring even more of them to a battle. Now, his actual stats we'll glance over with. So, he is a interesting lord. So he doesn't have the most amazing combat stats. He is armored and shielded though, which is nice. He can hold his own in melee combat, but he's not a one-man army in melee. His traits here: reduces enemy leadership, makes it cheaper to recruit, and gives control. Basically, as long as he's in a province, you can upgrade it cheaply. Enemies have trouble invading it, and it is very law-abiding. Which is nice, meaning you can kind of just focus in a handful of provinces and become strong there. But with the slave system, you really need to go out and raid and pillage. Honestly, this is a trait I think that should be reworked. Previously, Total Warhammer 2, you could pile all the slaves in one province, like Nagaron, and become absurdly wealthy. Since that's not a strat anymore, I think this trait needs to change, but that's me. He has a pretty standard blue line. The big difference is here, he gets Dread Slaver, which you're going to want to take probably. It's really up to you, but I recommend Root Marcher, probably Dread Slaver maxed out, and then either Server Die or Infamous Raider, depending what you're using him for. Server Die is probably the one you're going to take. Draft Master is really nice. The increased recruitment capacity is handy in a faction that has no global recruitment. Plus, recruit rank is always good. The next stuff is pretty standard for the elves, both high and dark. The big thing here is Elven Healing. This is how you're going to get your casualty replenishment rate. Both high and dark elves struggle with casualty replenishment rate. This helps a lot. Plus, reduce attrition through casualties through attrition. This is almost a needed thing on Malekith and Hellebron, mainly because they're going to be fighting the Chaos factions pretty early on, and you're going to want to destroy them. So being able to march their territory without losing half your army is really nice. Quartermaster, we're snagging for the upkeep decrease. It's really good. If you're worried about fighting multiple enemies at the same time, get Lightning Strike. If you're fighting Skaven, or you're on the back foot and needing to defend, Fleeting Shadow is probably one of the strongest ambush traits in the game. Good on defense, good on offense. Really nice. And Renowned and Feared is really nice as well. Recruitment range, resistant to heroes, more recruitment rank, and upkeep. All good stuff. It's worth snagging once you get to that point. Honestly, go down the blue line first, then start working on the other stuff. Pretty standard red line here for most factions. It's worth noting that if you start taking Slaughter Lord, his already powerful Blackguard of Nagaran becomes really powerful. And later on, the Favor the Fortunate just makes them even more monstrous in terms of actually fighting. You can get a nice buff early on with Linebreaker if you are trying to use their base infantry, which kind of sucks to fight in melee combat. Honestly, though, Sheaf Master is a better one to go, and you just want to take more Dark Shards, in my opinion. Further on, he's got two unique skill trees here. He's got Tyrant. Basically, you get more money, better control, more money from slaves, less corruption problems. Basically, this allows you to unite the Dark Elves and keep them loyal. Efforts redoubled, cheaper upgrades and constructions. Really doubles with his starting trait here of the Witch King of Nagaroth, to basically allow you to develop one province high really fast. If you want to start rolling out your elite infantry and elite cav and monsters really early on through Nagaroth, this is a good way to go. Outside of this, this allows you to land in an area and very quickly build up a capital settlement into a foothold, which helps considering part of this guy's lore is he's out to destroy the High Elves in Ulthuan. If you don't want to do that, you can go on to go combat, you go War Leader. Cheaper army upkeep, better post-battle loot, leadership. better if you loot, raid, and more casualties captured as slaves, which is huge. Triumph of Evil. Combined with Elven Healing here, you can get negative 80 casualties to attrition and even more casualty replenishment. And Reach equals Grasp gets you more money from battles. In my opinion, I like War Leader more than I like Tyrant. It's up to you, but overall, War Leader's ability to send Malekith, who should be your strongest lord, into the enemy faction to make money, win battles, and stay alive with the casualty replenishment and the reduced attrition is really good. Now, he has access to a variety of mounts. The big thing here is he gets a Black Dragon mount, which once he gets it, makes him one of the strongest lords in the air in the game. Overall, really powerful. Gives him an activatable ability. If you look on the left there, I can't click on it at the moment. You get the Black Dragon's Breath ability, which means you can bombard the enemies from above. Now, he gets Sadistic, making him better in melee combat, which is kind of nice. Eternal Hatred, more weapon damage. The big thing here is absolute power. So long as you're in an area, your troops will defend better and stay in combat longer. I actually recommend this. I don't usually recommend leadership auras, but it does make the Dark Elves frontline hold a lot longer, so your archers and artillery can kill them better. He also gets the standard resistances. Now, he's got access to the standard yellow line, and yes, you can do it. It does end with him getting a spell, which is kind of unusual. If you want to make him a melee fighter, this is not a bad thing to go down. But what makes Malekith one of the stronger lords in the game is his access to magic. Not many legendary faction leader lords get magic, and those that do are pretty good at it. You start with the access to Power of Darkness, which you can kind of hurt yourself to get magic back. Dark Elves are dark. Chill Wind, though, gives you a damage spell. Pretty decent. Spiteful Conjuration ruins enemies' armor. The Dark Elves basically are the anti-armor faction of the game. Power of Darkness buff makes it even stronger. Word of Pain massively weakens an enemy. Cast this on the enemy lord. Just be aware it has a high miscast chance. And they will get really weak. Upgraded Blade Wing. Standard stuff. Doombolt, though, is where you start to become a dragon-flying spell-casting monster. You can cast this very easily from above. Does a lot of damage. Soul Stealer, this is a great ability because it heals you as well as damaging the enemy. So it doesn't heal you, it heals allies in the range. So if you cast it on an enemy when it's next to Malekith, he'll heal. If you cast this on the enemy front line, it will heal any allies on the front line as well. Goes really well with his powerful Blackguard of Naggarond. Keeps them in the battle longer, and then the rest is standard. Overall, he's a powerful spellcaster who's decent in melee combat. You can either make him really good in melee combat and not a spellcaster. He's still not going to be able to solo entire armies. Or you can make him a spellcaster with decent melee stats and let him wreck things with spells and then not die instantly while fighting. It is worth noting that if you can go over to the Shrine of Cain and take the sword, he all of a sudden becomes that much better in melee combat. Overall, he's one of the better lords I find to give the Sword of Cain to because he's got high armor and it makes his melee stats much better overall. Now, as you saw earlier in the video, he starts north of Naggarond, fighting Skaven. You win a battle, you can march in and take Caldra in the first turn. Make sure you leave your lord in there. For some reason, it's working now. Hulk Hydra completes your starting region, making, I think, Malekith the first faction and the easiest one to consolidate a whole region, which is kind of odd. Now, you've got a lot of different options. The reason these different edicts are important is some of these, for example, sacrifice here, you need to issue a specific commandment over the province. Now, I recommend, obviously, you hit Slave Drive at the beginning, upgrade Naggarond, but then you want to start figuring out what you actually want to use. Honestly, I do demand highborn hostages on your first turn just to unlock the right and give a little bit of public order. If you want to grow faster, sacrifices for Cain is not the way to do it. Instead, you want increased slave production quota. But if you want to get stronger units early on to fight with, sacrifices to Cain is not a bad one to trigger. Early on, you can make a lot of money quickly from battles, and not having to replenish your troops as much is always nice. Further on, late game, enforced tribute payments are what you're going to use. Dark Fortunes, I would only do this on extreme defense or if enemy heroes are driving you nuts. And increased slave production quotas, just be aware it uses up a lot of slaves per turn, meaning you have to be fighting constantly to use it. Just realized I skipped the Dark Elves economy. Oops, we're going to go back to that. Let's finish up Malekith first, and then we'll go back to that. That way my chapters are nice and neat. So Malekith, right here, between these two provinces, you've already got a good start. Your next target should be the Altar of Ultimate Darkness. You're going to want to train at least a Dark Shard, in my opinion, and then probably you could get away with a Bleak Sword. You're not going to be fighting anybody with Cav or too many monstrous units early on, meaning you can actually use a rather bad unit to actually be able to kill Skaven. You want to take Altar of Ultimate Darkness within a couple turns, so don't spend all your time here recruiting, because Grombrindle lurks over here. He's out to get you. If he gets Altar of Ultimate Darkness, he becomes a lot harder to wipe out. If he doesn't own that, he's stuck with minor settlements for some time, and you can kind of finish him off at your leisure. Now, Altar of Ultimate Darkness, Rakdo Gorge, and Temple of Cain, and I believe Shrotek Mount are all owned by Skaven. That is your next natural route of expansion. Altar of Ultimate Darkness, though, is not part of your standard areas. Still worth getting, though. Build it up, put a garrison in it. By and large, Grombrindle Ancestral Throng will not be the biggest threat. Rakdo Gorge here is not, again, in another area, but it is a capital settlement, meaning Malekith is probably the fastest lord to get 3 capital settlements, which is good because you want to build them up. The sad part is getting Shrotek Mount and keeping it is difficult. Temple of Cain over here, which is the last place you should expand to, is part of the Hag Grief, Kragaroth Deep area. The danger here is Tauros, the Brass Bull, tends to take Storag Core, set up his blood grounds, meaning it's hard to colonize and keep a hold of these lands because he'll come after you. So, my opinion, snag Altar of Ultimate Darkness, fortify it, Rakdo Gorge, build it up slowly, Temple of Cain, just to round it out. If you can get to Kragaroth Deep, all the better. You'll unite, basically unite an area. If these guys go rogue or go to war with you, you take it, all of a sudden, you've got a nice little empire. You don't need to expand east unless they attack you. Leave that to Hellebron, Harganath, who starts with a non-aggression pact. Snag that trade agreement, demand some money. She will be your best ally for a while. It's not too hard to get a defensive alliance with her. And once you've consolidated that area, you have 2 options. One, you can go finish off Grombrindle. It will be a problem if you don't. But a defensive garrison here will keep him off your back for some time. Meaning you have another route of expansion. If you go north, right up here lurks one of the Warriors of Chaos, the Khorne one. It is worth trying to wipe her out before she becomes a problem. You can safely colonize chaotic wastelands. Be aware you are a non-aligned faction. You don't have corruption. Meaning, as soon as you start marching into this area, you'll take corruption. Now, you can get away with it by doing raiding stance. You do not have an encampment stance like other enemies. You do have channeling, though, which can be nice to heal your army, but it doesn't work to resist chaos attrition. For that, you're going to want to raid. You'll become immune to almost all the attrition you could possibly suffer. Try and take her capital settlement up here if you can, and then I would recommend going west, wiping out Mung, which will be, by and large, her vassal. Once you do that, march east, finish her off. Hopefully Hellebron has either secured or fought her way through this whole area, and then between her and you, you've secured most of the upper area of the map. You can either keep going east, which is probably what you'll end up doing, fighting more hordes of chaos, and if you get far enough over here, Malus, which is another Dark Elf Lord, will be over there. Confederating him and Hellebron will unite the top half of the map. If you want, rather than going north, I still recommend going north to kill off the Warriors of Chaos. You can go south. Some of these Dark Elves will die or lose. Alathanar over here tends to do pretty well. You'll need to wipe him out because he hates you. Further on down here, The Sisters of Twilight lurk over here, I think, or wherever they lurk. It's worth getting an on aggression pact with them. They're wood elves, but they don't hate you. They will handle most corruption in the area, and they're a good trading partner for the late game. Further on, subduing this area, Colostra Direfin lurks over here. Vampire Coast, you're going to want to wipe her out. At that point, you're not far away from Ulthuan, or you can go south and try and confederate Morathi, which is Malekith's mother. And Malekith's pretty easy. If you can expand to that size, you'll probably be the richest and most powerful faction in the game. Taking over the High Elf Ulthuan is relatively easy to do. Your victory condition, though, is to wipe out Tyrion, so at some point, you're going to have to go take Lothrin from him. Now, if you wait long enough, Morathi might do it, or the Slaanesh faction might succeed in conquering Ulthuan. In my opinion, it never does. But if it does, be aware invading there becomes a pain. So you don't want to leave it to super, super late game. The High Elves are very powerful, but it's worth consolidating and building a power base. Nagarond here is a super settlement. You're going to want to definitely throw a garrison in it so you don't lose it. But over here is where you're going to get most of your high-level military buildings. I would actually recommend avoiding getting stuff that you don't need. So you start with a barracks. It's worth keeping for a while. You can build riders. Getting the Doomfire Warlocks is worth it. I would skip Den of Outlaws. I would probably even skip Altar of Cain. You don't need Harganath Executioners, as strong as they are, if you get Blackguard of Nagarond. You have two unique buildings, one of which unlocks Blackguard of Nagarond and makes them even more monstrous. It's worth getting. It's also worth getting the Tower of Malekith as well. You still are going to want to get Dread Mance, though, if you want access to Dread One's Knights and Chariots. But honestly, you can ignore this building tree because you have it here. And instead, you can just snag barracks, you can snag cav, you can snag monsters, you can get a garrison, you can get magic. And right then and there, with the other unique buildings, you've got access to most of the Dark Elf's strong and powerful units. Anyway, that is Malekith. Now we're going to go back to economy. Okay, this is a bit out of order, but here is the Dark Elves economy. So obviously, the Dark Elves economy revolves around slaves, using slave dickcats properly. It's worth noting that if you get poor, you can sell slaves to make money. Outside of that, the Dark Elves have a somewhat interesting economy tree. It's the same in large, major, and minor settlements. They have a very good garrison, so it's worth throwing down a garrison. It will save you money from having to constantly defend your lands. Now, they have your standard growth building. Just like the High Elves, it gives casualty replenishment. It's worth throwing down if you're going to be fighting in an area. Thankfully, for people like Malekith, most of your fighting will take place outside of your lands because you're a very aggressive faction. Now we start to get into the more complex stuff. You can build artisan houses, which give 400 gold a turn, so decent amount. The big thing is, if you have slaves, 150 of them, it will use slaves per turn and give you an additional 300. All told, if you have a ton of slaves, you're probably the richest faction in the game. If you start losing slaves, as in you're not constantly fighting, this negative 40 slaves per turn will very quickly drop below 150 slaves, and you'll have problems. And once you drop below 150 slaves, just be aware, you're still going to be taking 40 a turn, so it's not like you can slowly build up to it and then have one turn of money and then before it falls. No, that's negative 40 per turn, even if you have a low amount of slaves. Now, slaves, of course, are an issue. You've got a control building, which is basically making slaves and other people fight to the death. Throwing this down basically will solve control problems. If you have corruption, you want to take Altar of Cain. If you're losing against the Chaos factions, you need this. If you're winning against them, you really don't. Your technology should handle it. Be aware, though, you don't have an edict here that purges corruption, meaning corruption management can be an issue if you're not aware of it. Then over here, you have the slave pens. Now, the slave pens are a relatively interesting one because they give you slaves, and more importantly, they give you a slave capacity. Now, it's 1,000 it fully upgraded to give you a capacity. It gives you 10 per turn, which does not balance out the guild halls at all. Basically, even though you have a powerful economy, you either can have a low amount of guild halls, meaning if you don't have slaves, you're broke, or you can have a high amount of guild halls, meaning you'll make money, but you'll never hit the unbelievable high amounts that having slaves will give you, except very rarely. In my opinion, build guild halls everywhere. Once you win a battle or two, you'll make a ton of money. Otherwise, who cares? This helps a bit. The really reason you build this is not the slaves per turn, it's to get the capacity so that you can sit at high income even longer. Now, for a large settlement, Black Roads is kind of nice. More income, more growth, more campaign movement. Honestly, I don't build this anywhere unless I had like a 4 province region that either had super buildings or gold mines. Outside of it, 4% income from buildings isn't massive. Honestly, you're better off building public order, and the guild halls is basically where you make your money. You have a half decent port. Be aware that unusually you lose slaves per turn as you upgrade your port because your slaves work on the port. Now you make good money from them, and it's similar to guild halls that you make tons of money if you have slaves. Basically, as the Dark Elves, you want to own lots of ports. You want to build lots of guild halls. You won't make tons of money until you get a lot of slaves, but since you should be fighting, raiding, pillaging all the others, making slaves isn't too hard. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure why raiding stance isn't giving me slaves. It used to from Total Warhammer 2, if I'm recalling correctly. I think that needs to change and it come back because right now managing slaves can get a little bit difficult since you have to be winning battles to get slaves, basically. And that is the Dark Elves economy. Lots of raiding. Make sure to capture slaves after every battle, basically. I tend to only take slaves when I win a battle rather than a siege battle. But if you're struggling with income, looting to get slaves is totally worth doing. On to the next Lord. Okay, here we are as the second of the Dark Elves Lords, Morathi. And Morathi is one of the more unique Dark Elf uh, ladies, I guess. So Morathi's center of power is centered here in the ancient city of Quintex, and she has been both nerfed and buffed since Total Warhammer 2. So first thing, she is obsessed with Slaanesh. In fact, she's the only non-demon, non-warriors of Chaos faction to spread Slaanesh corruption. Now, it comes with some actual benefits for her. First off, all characters spread corruption, which is nice, especially because Morathi is about using heroes a lot. Additional buff to that is nice. Heroes are cheaper for her to use. Structuring sorcery buildings, as in magic users, is cheaper and easier for her to do. And she can get Slaanesh demonettes, and corruption makes her slaves work harder. So if you hover over this, it will show you that you get a boost to slave capacity, orders, attrition for non-chaos factions, which means she is rather defensive. But it also gives you slaves per turn, which is nicely, and income from all slaves is up by 14%. This actually helps Morathi quite a bit, because it means the impact of guild halls here, losing slaves per turn, is actually not as awful as it sounds. You're going to have more income from slaves than you would expect, considering she buffs it, and she gets slaves from corruption. It's quite nice. It doesn't fully compensate for the loss of her formerly awesome Total Warhammer 2 building, the Catacombs of Quintex, which used to be one of the most overpowered special buildings in the game, meaning you could own any province regardless of corruption or public order problems, is weaker now. Instead, it gives income, growth, and income from buildings. All told, decent amount of income, nothing to write home about. The research rate and growth and control means it's much easier for you to maintain control of the province. Plus, the income from buildings does work on the slave buildings, which is really nice. Now, before we get into her and her bonuses, let's talk a little bit about her different building. So she has access to the Cult of Pleasure, because she's a Slaanesh worshiper. So she gets control. She spreads Slaanesh corruption. This is outside of using characters, the only real way you're going to spread this. Takes to level 4 before it spreads to adjacent provinces, so don't expect to disrupt too many realms using Slaanesh corruption. but it does give you access to the Demonettes of Slaanesh, which if you've played Nakari or the Warriors of Chaos, you'll know has the devastating flanker ability, meaning it's great at flanking charges. Now, early on, what this means is you don't need to use bleak swords at all. If you get this building, you're much better off using Demonettes than almost any of the Dark Elf infantry in the early to mid game. Further on, it does give you the Witch Elves, which, okay, they're still rather bad. The Exalted Demonettes of Slaanesh, though, are quite powerful. They hold their own in melee combat, they're armor penetrating, and they're really good at flanking, meaning once you get access to this, you can make a front line of the Blackguard of Naggarond, or if you're absolutely crazy, some of the other various stuff like the Harganeth Executioners. Um, and then just use your Exalted Demonettes of Slaanesh, which honestly are a better flanking unit than your Cav. They're slower though, but they're still faster than average, and they hold up pretty well in physical resistance, plus they're demons so they don't rout. Honestly, it's a very nice buff early to mid game, giving you a solid infantry flanker, rather than the rather weak Dark Elf Cav. Now, Morathi's starting area here has 4 regions in it. One you hold, Petrified Forest, you want to fight the first battle, go back, recruit, rebuild your army, take Petrified Forest in either turn 2 or 3. Honestly, waiting till turn 3 just means you suffer less casualties unless the enemy moves an army in there. Once you've done that, you want to try and finish off this faction here, Sithra Tor. They're relatively difficult to kill, in my opinion. Ideally, you don't want to do what I did here, which is why I showed you this load, and take Iron Spike. Iron Spike, yes, you can take it pretty easily. The downside is then it means that they will have a large army here in Sithra Tor, which you want. Now, it's not a huge issue because you also have to take Grey Rock Point, but just be aware that Iron Spike is no longer part of Morathi's starting area. This has been reworked since Total Warhammer 2. I'm not entirely sure how much I love the change, but the Slaanesh corruption rather than just generic Chaos corruption is rather cool. Once you're done that, if you look over here, you will see there's a lot of Chaos Skaven corruption. Guess what? There's Skaven in Dem Hills. You're going to want to move in, and you're going to want to take this area. If you keep going north, be aware that you'll start to run across other factions up there, so don't go too far north too quickly. You can colonize your way up there with just a generic lord. Usually, you don't necessarily need to bring Morathi up there. But Morathi does start with a Khainite Assassin, which at rank 4, you can strengthen the loyalty of lords, meaning you can freely have one lord sort of move around, colonize, and stay in your lands. Once you've wiped these guys out, you have 2 different options. One, you can go south and take Mazdamundi out. He is going to attack you pretty much inevitably. Sometimes you can get a non-aggression pact with him. He still breaks it mid to late game, in my opinion. My 2 runs I did, one I got to about turn 80, one to 110, but inevitably he attacked. And when he did, he had struck, of course, at the worst moment. Killing him off, though, secures most of your southern border for some time. Yes, there's orcs down there and other various ones, but by and large, it's more stable than you would expect. Further on, once you control that area, it gives you an easier route here to attack Skeggi, which, by the way, they kind of like you. It's very easy for you not to go to war with this faction. The downside is they control one of the provinces in your starting region, which you want. They also control the Moon Shard here, which you want. And they control this area, which at some point you want as well. Now, another option is, rather than going south, make peace with Mazdamundi, leave Skeggi in charge of these lands. They will lose them when the High Elves come west. Inevitably, Skeggi will either be destroyed by the Lizardmen or the High Elves, in which case you can march in and retake the area. If you do it that way, you want to go north here, push your way up here, get access to the other Dark Elves, confederate them, try and reconnect with Malekith up north. The reason you want to do that is you get along half decently well with him. Plus, having him as an ally is always a good thing. You're going to have to fight dwarves, Tomb King, whole mess, Skaven, potentially Empire Coast, and Alathanar. But overall, you're more poised to take this area than, say, Malekith is, considering he has to deal with chaos for some time. Be aware he can lose to Chaos. I haven't seen it happen, but he can lose. And overall, if you do it that way, you play much more defensive. Since you have no ports, you're going to be a little bit poorer, but the High Elves will take longer to come after you, giving you more time to build up to the higher buildings that you need. Ancient City of Quintex, sadly, is not a super city anymore, only 8 slots, but is going to be the main base of your power for some time. Throwing in a Slave Gate walls building and a Court of the Dark Flint there, all told, you'll have a heavily defensive, heavily corrupted area. Even if you lose your outer areas, they will have trouble getting to Quintex. It is a march or more turn to get there for most enemy armies. This is a great ambush location, by the way. You can hold out in Quintex for ages, even on something like Legendary. It's pretty cool. Be aware, though, if you fight a faction, some of them can jump the mountain ranges here. Thankfully, that most of the enemies you fight don't have access to the underway or anything else. Just be aware that that can happen. Now, Morathi herself is a very interesting lord. She has access to the standard blue line, so you want to get Elven Healing, Renowned Feared, Quartermaster, Draftmaster, Dreadslaver for sure. It's less of a necessity on her, but it makes her economy even more powerful if you get it. Standard red line, I'd rather neglect the red line. She has a fairly standard yellow line. There are some differences I'll mention later, but her big thing is up here. She, like Malekith, has a choice between 2 different playstyles. She can become insidious, all about scheming, assassination, manipulation, using lords and heroes and powerful shades, dark riders, and stuff to fight better. Shroud of Despair gives more corruption and weakens enemy leadership. This is your defensive tree. It becomes stronger the higher level game you play on because the enemy is more aggressive and harder to beat on the battlefield. Now, the other option here is you double down into her combat stats, similar to Malekith. She has some pretty powerful stuff. Honestly, compared to Malekith, her bonuses are even more crazy. Reduced upkeep massively. Corruption, casualty reduced. All told, she can get 8 plus 9, 17 plus 30. So she can have a almost half-off army, meaning she can run around with a pretty powerful little army. More corruption in all her provinces, better relation with chaos factions, rituals of blood, nice replenishment, training, and more importantly, a ward save for your entire army. Her army is stronger than Malekith's, fully built up, in my opinion. She doesn't get a dragon, though, unlike Malekith. She gets a Pegasus, meaning she's not really that good at flying combat, but it does allow her to lurk up there and rain spells down on the enemy, which we'll get into. More importantly, though, she has access to this little oddly outplaced unique tree. She can get blessings to get more magic, more replenishment, unlock sorcerers in all provinces without a building, which is really nice because Morathi gets pretty good sorcerers. And then finally, she gets a massive discount to most of her spells, cooldown, and almost no chance of a miscast, all told. So, yes, she has a standard yellow line, except for the end. She can either do Enchanting Beauty, 1001 Dark Blessings, or Deadly Onslaught. Outside of these, I think, or out of these 3, I would say 1001 Blessings to be the best one. Getting 30 physical resistance and 20 spell resist, considering you've already gotten some bonuses to her combat stats, means she can fight most lords, not legendary, in melee combat. Enchanting Beauty, though, does weaken enemies if you're not going to keep her in constant combat. So if she's on her Pegasus flying above, it can be very useful to weaken the enemies below her. Deadly Onslaught, though, I would just ignore. Now, she has access to a variety of different magics, mainly Power of Darkness magics, Lore of Dark Magic. So damage, healing of her getting more magic, heal her magic reserves at the cost of damage to herself. Doom and Darkness, this is a very powerful spell, upcast -16 leadership. You throw this on Skaven or zombies and stuff, they start to crumple almost immediately. It's one of the stronger spells. It used to be even more nuts, but it's still really good, and she can cast it pretty cheaply, all told, upgraded. Soul Blight weakens an enemy combat ability, always nice. Life Leeching, get more magic back. Now we're starting to get to more interesting stuff. Pit of Shades is pretty much an area effect nuke. It will destroy a lot of enemies in an area. It can be a little bit hard to hit the enemy right now because they know you're going to cast it, so they run away. But if you've locked them into melee combat, they can't run away. So once they start fighting, drop this on the back of the enemy line, and by and large, you can wipe out a good chunk of the enemy forces just using this spell in combination with your stronger units. Soul Stealer here. This is a pretty powerful one. Hits an enemy, heals Morathi, deals damage to the enemy, or any heals allies in an area as well. Spiteful Conjuration, armor. Actually, you know what? This might also hit allies in the area now that I'm looking at it. I don't know. I haven't tested it recently. Not that I cast it on my own allies, but it's pretty nice for the heals. Smoke and mirrors, more movement, weakens enemy armor. Between life leeching, power of darkness, every time she casts a spell, she gets magic back at a crazy rate and weakens the enemy. Her whole thing is honestly using spell casts and other debuffs to weaken the enemy. Now, she actually has half-decent quests here, which is why I mentioned them. First one, ward save plus 20, regeneration up. Combine this with her yellow line build, which gives her the physical resistance. She can have some crazy combat stats. In fact, all of a sudden, she becomes one of the mid to high tier combat lords, which is hilarious because she's not really designed that way. Plus, the casualty replenishment and wound recovery means if she loses her army, she comes back rather fast. This one, big buff to her magic spells. She gets a spell bound to it, which is one of the stronger bombardment spells, so she can cast that. Cheaper cost for damaging enemies and healing herself, and cooldown to all spells. Finally, Heartrender and Dark Sword, her swords, makes her even more of a melee fighter and weakens the enemy in an area around her. Once she gets this, she can go and duel on par with almost any lord in the game, outside of some of the most powerful ones like Grimgor, Tyrion, Chaos Lords. She becomes amazingly strong in melee combat. Honestly, I almost like her using her in melee more than magic, considering she gets some spells that she can spam anyway. It's worth doing these missions and this quest battle when you get the chance. The sooner you do the quest one that gives you regen, the more monstrous she is in melee combat, and the easier your initial battles will be. So do her initial starting area as much as possible. Once you've done that, decide if you're going south. If you do, strike Mazdamundi soon. Once he starts getting better source units, he becomes a pain to kill. Be aware he's a strong magic user, though. When Tex is center your power, build it up. Don't lose it. If you want to ally Skeggy here, be aware that then you won't get access to these nice regions for some time. You have a half-decent chance of confederating Dark Elves. They don't love you, though, but you can work to gain their trust. Further north, Sisters of Twilight lurk up here. It's worth non-aggression packing and trading with them. They won't like you that much because you spread corruption, but who cares? Later on, once you subdue this area, you're even more better positioned than Malekith to invade Ulthuan. And because of your corruption, you really mess up the elves once you do, because they have poor corruption reduction early on. Nikari lurks up here. You can actually get along with him half decently well, if he survives, which he tends not to. On to the next lord. So here we are as the third of the Dark Elf lords, although this is a lady. This is Crone Hellebron, or Hellebron. Hellebron. I don't know why I keep saying Hellborn. I guess this because it's so close to it. Hellebron. This is the lord that starts immediately to the east of Malekith here. She is situated out of Harganath, where she has this unique strategic building. Later on, these are very powerful. Once you can build them, you want to build them. But suffice to say, she starts at war with some enemies to the north. Fight the initial battle, build up, take the settlement. She can very quickly snag access to all three of these. Be aware, though, and this is why I'm midway into this, Karak up here is bordering the Legion of the Gore Queen, Warriors of Chaos. They will declare war on you. And to the east comes Prince Sigvald the Magnificent, the Decadent host. He will attack you when he meets you. You can, even though you might get 6 settlements rather quickly, defending them becomes a problem. Ideally, you want Legion of the Gore Queen to leave you alone. So if you get Karak to level 3 here and throw down a full-on Dark Palisade, it could hold with the help of maybe a Lord and a few Dark Shards up there with shields can hold out. Meanwhile, you want to take out Prince Sigvald the Magnificent and hold Frozen City if you can. You can get Frozen City, it's a nice defensive bot. At the beginning, it's owned by Dark Elves, meaning you have to start, I think it's owned by Dark Elves, meaning you have to start a war to get it. It's still worth punching your way through and trying to take over this area. Ideally, this lady doesn't come after you. She goes after Malekith or this random Dark Elf faction between you, Grond. You could theoretically ignore both Sigvald and whatever her name is up here and try and take out Grond. I don't recommend it because Sigvald tends to invade you regardless of what you're doing, even if you don't take these two settlements, which you kind of need to. Theoretically, if you left them abandoned, you might have some luck delaying him, but he's still coming for you nonetheless, and it's worth targeting to wipe out. Afterwards, you want to obviously finish off the lady up here as soon as you can. Then you can deal with Grond. You can either confederate them or you can kill them. It's not too hard to get a trade, non-aggression, and eventually work towards confederating them. It just takes time. The reason it's important is Grond has a gold mine. Once you get that, combined with all the other Dark Elves income bonuses, you won't have any trouble making money. Definitely throw down her slave drive diktat early on. You want to get Harganath and the rest of these to level 3 with garrisons in them as fast as you can, because you might be attacked on two fronts. Making it so the enemy can't just take a settlement, run in and sack a good chunk of your economy is always a good move. Harganath needs to be defended at all cost since it's your capital, but also because if you lose it, you have no other real province you can defend well in for some time. These two provinces here, feel free to sacrifice them to delay the enemies. They're still going to come after you anyway, sack and loot them, so don't put any major investments in them. Try to level up Spite Reach first, or Karak if you can do it. Karak would be ideal. Otherwise, Spite Reach, you want to defend and get a garrison in. Black Pillar, unfortunately, is in the worst place of two worlds and is very hard to defend from invasion. Once you've either dealt with that, you should either secure the north or you should avoid fighting them. The odds are you will have to secure the north. Down here is Alathanar. He will attack you very early on. Nagarath, he tends to leave you alone for some time. I have not really had him launch a naval invasion. Harganath isn't on the ocean. Nagrar, you either lose it or you're defending it. Meaning he doesn't have a really good landing spot. This terrain is unlandable, so he has to land like right here or here. You can easily fight him back. Once you do, I'd advise invading that area and taking it out. Malekith to your west, as long as he survives, will be your best ally for some time. Further to the east is Malus, I believe Darkblade or whatever. He's a good ally if he survives. I find he doesn't tend to long enough. And once you're done with that, we get into what you really should be doing as Crone Hellebron, which is why I think this start and this whole thing needs a rework. So Hellebron has a unique mechanic. You might notice this up here. This is her blood cauldron, basically. Her status. You start with it half decently built up, and over time, it falls. Once it falls at the lowest level, you will have massive penalties. Your lands will try and revolt. You'll have chaos spread. Hellebron herself will be weakened, and these blood voyages will be damaged. So how do you build this up? Well, that's where you run a Death Knight. This involves using slaves and sacrificing them, basically to bathe in the blood, because it's so nice and sanitary. In reality, though, you have to be able to do this every like 10 to 15 turns. Once you do, though, you do get an interesting bonus. You summon a blood voyage. Now, a blood voyage is changed from Total Warhammer 2, and I think it needs some reworks. First off, it will spawn. Once it spawns, it will declare war on the enemies down here in the High Elves faction, and it will start sailing in that direction. However, if you are at war with an enemy nearby, they do count as your vassal. So, depending on how things work out, they might be in a war with someone near you. This can be very useful because if you use the new Total Warhammer 3 alliance mechanics and you've somehow gained enough alliance income with them, so they have to survive 4 turns, You can then give them orders to attack areas or defend. Defending is not advised because once this starts falling to 3, they will start taking attrition. So sending them after the heart of the enemy, in this case I send it against Dagrak's end, they will take it, they will then keep attacking until they die. They have no chance of survival, they are a purely suicidal faction. Once they're done though, you'll get a chunk of resources and bonuses from doing so, plus you're going to have to do it anyway to get our full bonuses. Once you do though, you get great replenishment, your lords have better loyalty, you get perfect vigor on all of the cults. Which Hellebron is the head of. The Witch Elves, Sisters of Slaughter, Death Hags, Canite Assassins, Harganath Executioners all get bonus. You get some insane physical resistance on the same units, better control and leadership. If you aren't figuring it out already, you should be using those type of units in her army. So, Harganath, she owns. Executioners of Harganath, first off, there's a great building to buff them. Here, makes recruiting them and maintaining them better. And over here, cheaper, same thing for the Witch Elves and Sisters of Slaughter. Overall, it means that she's using some more of the elite, but less tanky Dark Elf units, even better. Meaning you should have those in your armies. Harganath Executioners will be the heart of your army. A little bit less usage of the Blackguard of Naggarond. They still have their place, though, and are worth using. But your Sisters of Slaughter here become almost unbreakable. Not entirely. Insane melee attack and defense, and overall what you want to focus into. So her bonuses, she has the Sacrifice Drakira, which is slightly different for her compared to the others. She gets ruined relations with the High Elves, but her Death Hags and Witch Elves get recruited better, and you fight significantly better against the High Elves overall. It's worth using when you go to war with High Elves, or you're going to recruit a new army. She gets more casualties captured post-battle. She desperately needs that for her Death Knight. Death Hag, she gets a +2 hero capacity. Now, why is that important? It basically means at the beginning, you can start recruiting them once you get the Shrine of Cain, which is actually worth rushing on her for that reason. They're powerful melee heroes. Having them in your army is great. Now, Sacrifice of Cain here, which other people have for healing, loot, and casualties, is cheaper for her. You should almost always use this when you know there's going to be a fight. Just be aware of the very long cooldown duration on it compared to some of the other sacrifices. And finally, she gets more money from slaves. How lovely. So let's look at Hellebron herself. So Hellebron herself is a very powerful melee fighter. Not so great on the defense. She doesn't run away very easily, but she is head of nuts with what she has. So her actual trait is the greatest bride of Cain. Cheaper upkeep for all those cult people, meaning her army is dirt cheap if she's using those. And they do more damage. Now, she's got some decent combat stats, which are, of course, being further buffed by some of these abilities. So we'll try and hit up on each of them in time. First off, her blue line, this is what I recommend. Route Marcher, Slaver, Server Die, Draft Master, Elven Healing, then probably Quartermaster, Renowned and Feared, and if I feel the need, Fleeting Shadow. Fleeting Shadow is kind of important if you fight an Aleth Anar because he tends to do a lot of ambushes. So she's got a pretty standard red line. There is some differences though. First off, these are passive eternal durations of buffs to people in the area, weapons attack, and weapon damage. It can be worth actually going down the red line with her early on, specifically if you can buff her Witch Elves and stuff to become even more defensive, resistant to damage, and buffed. Basically, she charges in at the head of a bunch of insane cultist elves and slaughters people, unless they have range, in which case they die first. She's got standard yellow line here. It's pretty normal. Blood Frenzy is worth mentioning. The longer she's fighting, the stronger she gets, and she doesn't get tired, basically. Up here is her unique line. First off, physical resistance makes her already tankiness even better. More risk resistance for your cultist units, which is good because they die to range. Favor of Cain, once you get it, is great. You can buff everything in an area. Basically, once you use this on your cultists, they become insane killing machines for the duration of 28 seconds. Daughters of Despair buffs your cultist units even better, makes them slaughter infantry really nicely. Rapturous Murder makes Hellebron become a monster at charger and fighting basic infantry. Playthings of the Queen, though, is worth snagging probably first or second in this category. Capture more casualties, better loyalty, and more income from slaves. The highlight, though, is Blood Queen. She gets regeneration. And her Death Knight armies are even stronger, and she gets even tankier. Now, she's got a couple different steeds, or mounts rather. Dark Steed, it's pretty much ignorable. Cauldron of Blood is kind of interesting. It can be quite useful in its own right, but the Manticore here becomes rather useful. It allows her to fight better and longer in combat. Overall, her combat stats are really good. Greater Ward of Cain, even more missile resistance than you might already have. Let's get her off this mount here for a moment, just so you can see some of this stuff. So the Cauldrons of Blood here, you'll see that some of this changes. Cauldron of Blood gives Fury of Cain augmented in area to be used, which is quite nice in its own right. And it also gives you access to the Blood Shield of Cain, which is a physical resistance buff to all your units in an area, which is rather nice. Manticore, on the other hand, not as crazy. Her actual combat stats are slightly better than they might appear when she's on the Manticore. Really good in melee combat and defense. The Manticore, however, is worth using. It allows her to fly. She can still land and do decent damage, though. Further on, though, she's got this other unique skill tree up here, Witch Brew, which is a buff to melee attack and damage she can use on herself periodically. Basically means she will never miss on attacks and she'll do a lot of damage. Then she has access to the Secrets of the Cauldron, which boosts her health even more, along with the second Cauldron, which gives her a quicker cooldown and allows her to use it more often. You should pretty much proc this consistently. Be aware, though, it sends her on a rampage, so you can't control her. So if she gets isolated on her own, she can die surprisingly fast. Her melee defense is not the greatest in the game, but she'll do a lot of damage before she dies, though. So pick your pick. I recommend having troops around her to support her when she goes on a rampage, though. Her quests, though, are kind of interesting. Her first one, Amulet of Dark Fire, is definitely worth doing. 15% war save is absolutely nuts compared to her normal resistances. All told, she becomes an absolute army killer, not a solo army killer. She has trouble with lords and heroes in my experience, but base infantry just dies to her. She just annihilates them. She's armor piercing, tons of damage. She also gets Amulet of Dark Fire, which gives all her allies around her spell resistance, which is rather needed. She just doesn't have a lot of good stuff to protect her from range or spells, so any additional bonus helps. Death Sword and Curse Blade is quite nice, though. It gives her some actual melee defense and buffs her attack and gives her magic attacks as well. So her attacks are poisonous, armor piercing, and magical. And she gets Curse Blade. Now, Curse Blade is kind of interesting. So long as she's fighting and she's in melee combat and the units are losing, they start taking more damage. This just allows her to slaughter units even faster. It's really kind of nice. It's worth snagging once you can do the quest battle. Don't try and rush it super early, though. But late game, definitely get it. So that is Hellebron. That's her start. Make sure that you do use Death Knight consistently. These bonuses are great. They become a problem later on. In Total Warhammer 2, you were giving quests at the beginning of the game, which allowed you to prevent this from falling later down. I don't know if it's bugged, or they don't exist, but I'm not getting them in any of my test runs. If they do, great. You want to complete the quests. Before it was like, take a certain number of settlements and defeat Morathi and Alariel, and you could never fall below respected. If those exist, try and do them. If they don't, just be aware that you got to keep using slaves. Slaves are the core of your economy. Lots of raiding, lots of enslaving, and you will be rich and powerful as Hellebron, the best slaver in the game. On to the next lord. Okay, here we are as the next lord of the Dark Elves, Malus Darkblade. This is the guy for if you thought Teclis or Alisanar of the High Elves were too easy, or Boris Ursus of Kislev was easy mode. This guy has it rough. He's cursed by a demon, and more importantly, he's in the middle of the Chaos Waste, surrounded by factions that kind of all want him dead. This is Malus Darkblade. So Malus Darkblade is possessed by the demon Zarkon, who's controlled by elixirs, which of course are owned by Malekith, who won't give it to you. Now, he gets whispers periodically over here. They're basically mini missions that you can do. You'll get bonuses if you complete them. He gets a huge buffs to iron mines, gold mines, and quarries. This, if you can get a hold of gold mine, will solve most of your money problems for a good chunk of the game. Outside of that, just means iron and marble quarries are worth building in as well. Sadly, he doesn't really have any in his starting area. So Malus starts not in possession of a province, which is an unusual start. To be fair, he does start with a slightly larger army, and he starts with a black arc. So, as I said earlier, we'll look at black arcs. So, black arcs here are a horde building. They can only go on the ocean, obviously, since they're a giant sailing ship. As they level up, they give you more slaves, cheaper upkeep in them, meaning you can have a full stack in the black arc, and it's rather cheap to raid and pillage. And they give army abilities to their army, meaning they're a lot stronger than they appear. It's got your pretty standard build tree here. Slight difference because it doesn't have an economy. Instead, you get a growth and casualty replenishment for armies in the circle of influence. I talked about this earlier, but we'll go into more depth. Basically, this black arc has a circle around it. We might only be able to see it. Oh, no, we can't right here. Here we go. See this circle? That is the area of influence. It's rather huge. As long as your army's in it, they will get various bonuses. First off, they will replenish faster. Armies can recruit from it. And more importantly, your armies in that area will replenish in foreign territory. This basically is a movable support army to buff your main armies. And you can improve it further. You can improve the casualty rate. All told, with all the casualty replenishment rates, the Dark Elves, as long as they're near one of these things, can replenish armies insanely fast. This one right here, huge buff to income from battle, sacking, and casualties captured. Also, that voice, if you can hear it, is the demon and Malus arguing with each other. It happens periodically. It's a little disturbing. They also get this arena. Recruit rank buff in area and armies in the radius train as well. It's a very nice buff. Overall, you can access all the Dark Elves armies from it, I believe, without any exception, which makes it very handy, meaning if you use this properly, you don't really need to have a capital settlement. If it is destroyed, though, you do need a port to recruit it again. Once you do, you'll get the same leader here, who's got his own unique tree as well. Overall, I tend to recommend you go down the blue line for him just so he gets all his buffs and increases the recruitment in his army and maintenance. It can become pretty crazy how strong these lords can be. He is unbreakable, which is quite interesting, meaning red line on him is yellow line on him is pretty good. So that is the black arcs. Most factions need to do the ritual. You and Lokhir start with them, which is kind of nice. So as Malus, this demon option up here is quite annoying. So it starts full possession. You have Slanesh problems. You get better relations with chaos demons, which is kind of nice. You get a huge ward save, huge buff to melee attack, missile strength, and you get the ability to transform in battle into Zarkon. You get huge amounts of combat ability. You restore your health, meaning you want to use it almost right before Malus dies, but you take damage over time. It's very powerful. Ward save is massive. Basically, if you use it, Malus can 1v1 most of an army. Later on, he becomes an army killer. Just be aware, if the enemy or you're playing other players, they will just back off and let him die of unavoidable damage from the ability. He cannot solely win battles at the beginning of the game, but what you want to do in the first initial battles is throw him into the enemy army and let him kill things. No more important than the initial battle here, which we will go over. The first things, you get a master. In case you're worried about what a master is, they're kind of a buff thing. They're decent combat, but they can also buff your armies as well. You want to throw this guy in your army. Then with Malus, what you want to do is make sure that this is in an area nearby, and you want to start sieging Blackrock. yes, you can win this with a close victory. If you fight the battle, you send Malus forward, transform into the demon, and just let him wreck this garrison. He does it really quickly. He's not particularly fast, though. Be aware that he does have some trouble closing with the enemy. But if they try and defend in melee combat, he will absolutely destroy them. It can save you a lot of casualties. Otherwise, auto resolve, you take the settlement, make sure to occupy it. Now, this is important because you have a choice. You can either keep Hoggref, which we'll look at in a moment, and have to defend it and hold on to it, or you can give it away and get 20,000 gold. The 20,000 gold is really nice because it allows you to set up an economy in an area. Honestly, though, I really like retaining Hoggref, in my opinion. It's quite nice. And oh, I got a nice trinket on him. Hoggref is this settlement over here. It doesn't look like much to begin with, but what is amazing is it has a unique landmark. Now, this is not as broke as it used to be. This used to be the richest settlement in the game, but all told, building it, which you can build pretty early on, you just have to either level it up or destroy one of these buildings. You get access to the Face of Hoggref, which is a negative 60 upkeep for all units in the area. What this means is, since it gives you money and gives you great trade goods, so long as you're trading with Malekith, which you should be, you can upkeep a full or even half stack of an army there to defend the settlement and still make money. Fully upgraded, you make tons of money, and there's a huge buff to cold ones that you recruit from the area. Combine it with the port, the income building, and a garrison, and you've got an insanely rich, hard to take settlement that can actually afford its own army to defend it. Just be aware, until you get that going, it can be a little bit difficult to defend. You do start with access to shades here. A strategy I have used is to recruit a lord, use some of your initial money to raise some troops there, then of shades, then get rid of the shade building and build the unique Hoggref monument. All of a sudden, it will solve the money that you're using to upkeep that army and give you another foothold if for some reason you struggle to hold on to here. Otherwise, you can go reckless, get rid of that settlement, and have tons of money to build this up. Just be aware, this is not the world's greatest start. In fact, you could theoretically even just pack up, join the Black Ark, and sail home. It's not the largest distance. Kind of do what Altharion the Grim does at the High Elves. Come back here where you can easily wreck everything in your path. If you choose to stay, we will talk about that. So Black Rock is important to take. Now, what you want to do with it, I recommend, is either throw down a growth building, which I would say is rather important here. You could theoretically build a garrison building. I would not recommend that, though. I recommend the growth. Reason is, you've got this admiral here with a barracks. Now, if you upgrade this, it will give you access to more of the basic infantry. But in the meantime, you get access to tier 2 infantry early on. Now, if you watched my unit section, you'll know that the Black Ark Corsairs are not the world's best infantry, even for their tier. However, under Malus Darkblade, they're pretty good, and they will wreck most of the enemies nearby. You want to keep building them up. Be aware you can not only build from your Black Ark, you can also build from the settlement. Meaning, if you want some range, get some Black Ark Corsairs handbows. Be aware, though, they're not armor piercing. Thankfully, most of the enemies you fight early on aren't armored. Now, in terms of the possession here, it does start fully possessed. How you manage this, and this was something that annoyed me for a while, was you actually go up here, click on this drink elixir, and it will lower it by 10. Now, if you do drink elixir again, you will buff it all the way and get these bonuses. Insane growth, you get a new right, and reduce corruption. You get much weaker in combat, though, and you can no longer transform into a demon. It can be worth doing this at the beginning parts of the game once you've taken Black Rock, just so that you can improve it really fast. If you abandon Hoggref, this is the strategy I would recommend doing that. At any point, though, you can succumb to Zarkin every 40 turns to get full possession again if you get invaded. Meaning, early on, best strategies probably rock the elixir twice once you take Black Rock, allow you to purge the corruption, which will otherwise cause you trouble, and then build up, get the growth building or the resource building here to make some money or grow. I would ignore Artisan's House for a while. It's up to you, though. It can help you with some of your initial economic woes. Build up your army. You want to try and take Blighted Grove and Cliff of Beasts relatively quickly. Another strategy, though, rather than taking these settlements, is to build up even faster and rush Forest of Decay. Now, the Demon Prince, aka Build a Bear Your Own Lord, starts up here. He'll take this area, and guess what? He doesn't like you very much. Meaning you can get into a pretty major war early on, especially if you've lowered the possession. I do recommend lowering possession so you build up. If you don't, theoretically you might not get at war with him. You want to kill him off though. Once you kill him off, you have to deal with Norska to the south. Throg can come after you sometimes, annoyingly. Overall though, he's pretty easy to get to leave you alone. Sometimes, like right first turn, get a non-aggression pact with a lot of money from him, and he tends to leave you alone. Further to the west, you've got Sigvald the Magnificent, who is over here. You're going to want to kill him off. I recommend marching west if you have the chance. That will get you reunited with Harganath, Crone Hellebron, and Malekith himself. And overall, once you secure this area, almost no one's going to invade you, especially if you keep Norska happy with you, which you can do. Basically, everyone around you either likes you so that you can get a non-aggression pact, or you can very quickly get one fighting chaos and other people. Just be aware of your diplomacy. You can get dogpiled if you're not careful. The other option, rather than going west, is you go east, where you run across some minor factions, and if you're lucky, Boris Ursus over here. He dies rather quickly. If you bring Dark Shards with shields, they will pretty much wreck his Kossar units. Hilariously, he can almost not counter that spam early on. And you will get a mission relatively early on. I don't think... Oh, here it is. If you own 10 province entirely, you will get the Elixir Recipe, meaning you can use this ability to lower possession as much as you want, which is rather nice. The Elixir gets more expensive every time you drink it, meaning you constantly have to be making money, meaning you actually have to spend at a decent pace or risk internal problems. Now, internal problems aren't the worst because the revolts you can then kill to get more money and slaves, and eventually you will be able to afford the elixir. Just be aware it's a bit of a pain to deal with an increasing cost every time you use it. It's not a huge increase, but it does build up over time. Now, you have nothing particularly special for Malus in terms of technology. Unlike Morathi, whose some techs are changed, Malus is pretty straightforward. Now, we'll look at Malus here. Be aware he is suffering a penalty towards melee attack because we used the elixir twice. Otherwise, he'd have a bonus along with a ward save, making him that much better. So this is his actual stats if he's not possessed. So standard blue line, I still recommend the same one. Route Marcher, Dread Slaver, Server Die, Draft Master, Elven Healing, Renowned Feared, Quartermaster. You really don't need Lightning Strike or Fleeting Shadow early on unless you're on the defensive. You've got a red line here with a buff in an area. It's worth snagging. Malus is a purely melee lord. You're going to want him in the heart of combat most of the time. You could even justify going down this before the red line, before the yellow line, but the problem is Malus possessed by Zarkin or whatever. What's the name of the demon again? Zarkon. Becomes an absolute one-man army, meaning going down his yellow line is worth it before the red. Now, he does have several other options up here, his unique stuff. He gets access to the Waking. These depend on his... I think they depend on his possession. Yes, some of these do. So the Waking here, big buff, causes damage to himself. This is abilities you get when using Zarkon. Pain tolerance, missile resistance, melee defense until you transform into him, meaning he's stronger without turning into a demon, which is great because if he's strong already, he can fight on his own. And then once he transforms into the demon, he's powerful again. It's almost like replacing him with another unit. Lying in wait, if you want to ambush, is cool. Now, Slumber is really neat because this is huge buffs to the already powerful Zarkon. Do damage. He gets a couple abilities when transformed. And you got some hexes that do hurt him, but give him huge buffs or weaken enemies. Avatar of Terror, lower army leadership, actually quite nice while fighting demons. They collapse faster. You then cause terror, supernatural tissue, huge healing buff for him, and an additional ward save. Now he would have 50 ward save. We've got an item that's giving us 5. Cold Heart here is for snagging, particularly early on for him. The reduced casualties combined with Elven healing means you can kind of wander around the Chaos Wastes rather quickly without too many casualties and replenish. He's all about the cold ones though, so the buff to the vigor loss is nice, but not game changing. This Drakau Tyrant is honestly ignorable except for the control and upkeep. The Lords gaining loyalty is entirely pointless. Contempt of Hate is a huge weapon buff when fighting anything and everything. And he gets this very powerful Cold One unit. It's worth throwing him on it. The weakening of his stats is not there. Overall, it is an improvement. Slightly less good at dueling, but the increased charge and movement speed is a huge buff. Plus, he gets more armor, which is neat. And he does have a quest, the Warpstone of Cain, which is actually his whole thing where he is. He's looking for this. Ambush defense is nice, bigger buff to combat. He gets the Warpstone of Cain, which is very powerful. It gives 5% ward save and healing over time, meaning as long as he's fighting as Zarkon, he will be almost impossible to kill. He'll be healing. He'll have like 55% ward save or more. Overall, he'll become a single army killer. The actual units in his army, outside of cold ones, matter less than you'd expect. This Blood Rack Medusa, though, is worth keeping alive for the huge missile and range strength. In fact, I don't think I've even mentioned this because we went over the Blood Rack Shrine more. This is a great unit when you can build it. It's very powerful, great range, and good damage as well. I don't know why we didn't cover it before, mainly because the Blood Rack Shrine is not in the tree at the moment.
No help needed.
Yeah, see, it's not there. It should be up here somewhere. It's worth building that unit. I don't know which building gives it to you at the moment because it doesn't show. It's worth keeping that unit alive. Between that, Malus, and your master unit, all 3 of those can wreck entire enemy armies given time. This is a very powerful ranged unit you're going to want to have sitting at the edge of the battle blasting away. And enjoy. Malus is difficult, very powerful. You want to make sure you keep leveling up your black art as much as you can to get better buildings and stuff. It can be worth spending a lot of your money early on to get all the upgrades going to buff Malus. Just try and make sure that you move it around. It can be attack the black art, so you might, when you have a chance, put some units in it. They're very cheap to maintain army here. So a whole army of black art Corsairs and Corsair handbows is about as strong as that army is going to get. But early on, nothing else is going to be able to kill it. Plus, you can always raid and pillage your way along this area to make money and get slaves if you need it. And that is Malus Darkblade. The poor guy, not that he's a nice person, is possessed by a demon, and your whole gameplay honestly revolves around that mechanic. So enjoy, have fun, try to make friends with the other Dark Elves. Trading with them, allying, can get you the needed money to fight constantly. Okay, here we are with the next Lord, Rakath. If you thought all the other Dark Elves that we've covered so far were freezing up in the northern winds, this guy is the opposite problem. He is in southern Lustria in the bottom left of the map. So in the southwest, Rakath has moved from Albion because that has been taken over. So now he is down here. It's a change I heartily agree with. This guy is the monster tamer of the Dark Elves. He captures monsters in battle and he summons them. If you were wondering what this expanded roster was, that's him. He gets all of these units and he gets them through battles and other things. So his forces do not receive vigor penalties for raiding, which is quite nice, meaning you can raid pretty much freely your heart's content without any fear of enemies attacking you while you're weaker. All monstrous units in your army are cheaper, which is nice because you're going to have a lot of monsters. So the big mechanic here is when he conquers an area, he will get a monster pen. Now this builds up to a different capacity depending on the unit. And it is an instant recruit. You pay the money, you get the unit. You'll get a lot of harpies. Let me tell you about that. You'll also get a variety of other ones. You'll get stuff like the Feral Carnosaur, which is just getting this on like turn 1. A level 3 monster unit is huge. You can get black dragons, you can get mammoths. Depending on where you're fighting, you'll have different chances of getting them. If you look, it tells you the unit can be replenished by attacking lizardmen settlements, raiding in the jungle, sea battles, attacking dark or high elves. If you want to use a specific one, this is how you're going to do it. Do these different battles and stuff. Some of them are really powerful, and you can get stuff like ice bears, which is rather neat. Bloodrack Medusas, if you attack other dark elves, you can get lots of them. It's really nice. Be aware though, since it's an instant recruit, don't put them on the battlefield till you need them. It is not worth the upkeep costs. A lot of them are very expensive, meaning, while I could raise this unit right now on turn 1, I'm not going to do it until I'm ready to attack. Once I do, I will raise it and then attack. It does cost a chunk of change though. Just keep an eye on the cost. But it allows you to recruit a full army almost instantly, assuming you've been building this up. Too bad a lot of these units, you'll get a lot of harpies, squigs potentially, or spiders, or wolves. Depending where you fight in the world, you'll have more of them. They are not that great, but the higher level ones, hydras and everything else, are amazing. Getting Charybdises is actually relatively easy. If you look around the map, sometimes in the ocean, you will get random events, battles, or places of interest. Sailing into them, fighting that battle, you can get quite a few Charybdises, meaning this guy is actually a legitimate person to use them with, rather than War Hydras being better. So let's look at him. First off, he starts with a unique armor, which is worth mentioning because it buffs a variety of things. First off, he has Whiplash, which allows him to boost monster units, make them fight better. Since he starts with a War Hydra, this is the unit ability. You're going to want to use Whiplash on that Hydra several times in a battle. Buff it, make it stronger. Gives him increased leadership, some armor, and a passive ability that gives him damage resistance and melee defense if there's an enemy large presence in range, meaning monster units, basically. Since you're going to be fighting a lot of lizard men, this allows Rakath here to be very good at killing beasts, the dino units. He actually excels at that hilariously. Now, in terms of his actual stats, he's not the world's most amazing fighter, but he does a good job at what he does, which is buff things around him. He's not personally a fighter compared to some of the other lords. Instead, he buffs them. Beast Lord, all monsters units reduce cooldown. This is the ones you train, not the ones you recruit from the pen. Melee defense is up for all monsters unit, meaning they fight better. And he has ability called the Beast Lord's Gaze, which stops rampage. Some of your monsters units, like the dino ones, will go nuts. It also gives them ward save and leadership to make sure they keep fighting. He's got the standard blue line, standard red line. Be aware he doesn't have a amazing way to buff all his monster units. The closest you get is going to be Confer Bloodlust, which will boost stuff like your Medusas and other stuff. Steel Will, though, really good because it will stop rampage in an area. I will recommend you get this, especially if you're struggling. It also debuffs enemy monsters units. Now, he's got the same strength through spite, which is kind of odd, but Steel Will is worth snagging. Now, his yellow line is pretty standard. The interesting one is Beast Slayer here. He can buff it. This allows him to do massive damage to enemy dino units, which is, by the way, the most common monsters unit you're going to fight for some time. Now, his other abilities here, these are just buffs, looting, raiding, buffs his harpies, makes so they have no upkeep. This means there's really no excuse for this guy not having a full stack of armies. Harpies are trash. They don't stop being trash, but free upkeep is amazing. Free range, increased replenishment when in foreign territory is nice. Reduced control. He's all about invading. Breeding programs, buffs Hydras and Charybdises. Remember how I said you could get more Charybdis? This helps. It also gives them passive abilities to make them stronger, which is quite nice. Weakens leadership and stuff. Harpy Claw bolts. Increased chance when you fight a battle. or raid or occupy a settlement that you'll get monsters. More slaves captured is nice. And Scourge Runner chariots and bolt throwers gain Harpy Claw ammunition, which reduces enemy movement speed on hit. These means the chariots and your artillery units become way more useful in combat. It's not game breaking, but it's nice to mean you can control the enemy's speed. Pack Hunters, better ambush. Cold Ones get a buff everywhere, and you get Stalk, meaning you can launch some crazy ambushes with Cav unit. Shames the Dark Elves Cav units are not unbelievably strong. Apex Predator, huge buffs to your monstrous units, adds Murderous Prowess to monsters, meaning the whole Dark Elves buff when they kill enough stuff now triggers on your monsters, making them even more nuts for the 90-second duration. So up top, Scourge Runner Chariot. You can take this. I don't think it applies this Harpy Claw ammunition. It might. If it does, it's really good. I haven't bothered to test it. It's worth snagging on him and putting him in this and keeping him in this for some time. Since he's not the most amazing fighter in combat, even with his buffs. This allows him to blast at range, giving you a kind of light artillery. It's rather useful. Manticore is a nice buff if you want to fight with him. Still doesn't solve his lower combat stats. Rakath, on the other hand, you get a black dragon. Now you can cast spells. You're flying. Well, you can't cast spells. You can do Noxious Breath, which is quite nice. It's a very good buff if you're going to use him in combat. But the big thing here is this Beast Tamer, which buffs your Cold Ones and charge bonus on most of your monster units. Meaning you get a whole bunch of beasts. They charge into combat. They do damage. You keep them from rampaging them, and you keep them fighting on and on and on. Now, some of your heroes have other ways of buffing them. You want to stack buffs on the monstrous units. You want to have a huge army of like War Hydra, Charybdis, even Harpies if you need to. And that is your playstyle. Raiding, pillaging, build up an army. Try not to lose your high-level monster units. Recovering them can be a pain. You've got a very good start, in my opinion. I like this start. Once you take Chamber of Visions and Sentinels, this is a relatively safe area. You've got some Zeech factions to the north, which you can kill if you want to, along with another Dark Elf. If you go south, you can start fighting your way through a Tomb King, which, by the way, early on, your monstrous units will just absolutely wreck. If you keep going south, you will run across more Lizardmen, some Dwarves, and then Skaven. But by and large, this wall here means that this is a very protected area, allowing you to raid and pillage outwards a lot more than you start at the beginning. Now he's got a quest here for the Whip of Agony. It's worth snagging. The increased movement range, weakening allies is nice. But the big thing is his Whip of Agony now affects enemies, weakens them in melee combat. It's nice if you use it on some very strong enemies. The Lizardmen have Croxagores and stuff, which left alone will wreck your units. This weakens them massively, so you can do damage to them. And overall, that's it. Rakath is all about monsters, which is kind of nice because the Dark Elves' strongest units are monstrous units. Overall, great, powerful lord, good start. You're on your own, though. Don't expect really any allies. But you can easily dominate Lustria. Just make sure that you do build up a bit, so if you lose an army, you can replenish it without having to do raiding and pillaging. Bit of a feast or famine guy. If things go bad, things go really bad. If they're going well, you've got even more and stronger monsters to use. Enjoy, have fun, on to the next lord.